A suburban feud over a single complaint. She called animal control, whispering about wild creatures. He swore it was an injustice. But then, a shadow moved in her backyard, a silent, impossible threat. And for the first time, he saw her face, not with triumph, but with pure, unadulterated terror. The official letter arrived with a quiet thud, landing on the ornate oak of Marcus's front porch. He was outside, wiping down the frame of the geodesic dome that housed his life's work, his passion. The sun, a warm golden eye, cast long shadows across the perfectly manicured lawns of Meadowbrook Estates. He picked it up, expecting a solicitation for lawn care or an invitation to the annual Homeowners Association barbecue. The envelope was stark white, save for the official-looking crest of the Meadowbrook Animal Welfare and Control Department. A knot formed instantly in his stomach. Inside, the language was sterile and clinical. Following a report of a nuisance involving wild and/or exotic animals on your property, it began, we are conducting a mandatory investigation. He read the address of the complainant, and his blood went from a slow simmer to a furious, rolling boil. 3 Meadowbrook Lane, Brenda's house. Of course. She lived directly behind him, her 2-story colonial a pristine bastion of conformity. Brenda was the self-appointed matriarch of the neighborhood, her existence dedicated to ensuring every blade of grass, every holiday decoration, every single human interaction was perfectly, excruciatingly aligned with her vision of suburban utopia. For the past 3 years, her primary target had been the aviary, a structure of steel and glass that Marcus had built with his own 2 hands. He called it the sanctuary, a place of vibrant plumage and melodic song. She called it a menagerie of pests. He strode purposefully across his yard, a righteous anger swelling in his chest. His strides were long, eating up the perfectly cut grass. He didn't bother to go around the block. He cut through his own yard, past the sanctuary, its steel frame glinting in the late afternoon light. The air was filled with the gentle, chittering songs of his sun conures, the deep cooing of his emerald doves, the raucous calls of his eclectus parrots. These were his wild animals. These were the nuisance. The sheer audacity of it left him breathless with rage. He marched to the border of their properties, a low-slung white picket fence that felt more like a demilitarized zone. Brenda was in her garden, a pair of gardening gloves on her hands, meticulously pruning a rose bush. She didn't look up, pretending not to notice him. The pretense was a match to the gasoline already doused on his fury. "Brenda!" he called, his voice tight and low. She snipped a dead bloom, placing it gently in a wicker basket. "Good afternoon, Marcus. A little loud today, aren't we? Are you sure you're not disturbing anyone?" He held the letter aloft like a court summons. "What is this, Brenda? What is this nonsense? Wild animals? My birds are registered, vaccinated, and contained. They are a damn sight less wild than the squirrels you feed in your front yard." She finally looked up, her expression a mask of feigned innocence that barely concealed a smug triumph. "Oh, that? Well, Marcus, a few of us have had concerns for quite some time now. Their shrieking is a bother, and frankly, who knows what diseases they carry." "Diseases? Are you insane?" He shot back, his voice rising despite his best efforts. "They're healthier than you are. You know as well as I do that they're no danger to anyone. This is about control, isn't it? You want my garden to look exactly like yours, don't you? Brown-nosing the HOA with your perfect pansies and your quiet life. This is petty, Brenda. This is pathetic." Her eyes narrowed, the mask of innocence falling away completely. "It's called community standards, Marcus, and you're violating them. Your little hobby is a blight on this neighborhood. We deserve peace and quiet, not a jungle menagerie." "A jungle menagerie?" He scoffed, gesturing wildly towards his property. "It's an aviary, a sanctuary. I work with endangered species. I'm doing something important, something you couldn't possibly understand with your pathetic life of perfectly manicured boredom." A flash of genuine hatred flickered in her eyes. "You think you're so much better than the rest of us, don't you? With your special birds and your self-important projects? You're a menace, Marcus. And now you're a documented menace?" She turned back to her roses, the conversation over. "The inspectors will be in touch." He stood there fuming, his hands balled into fists as she calmly returned to her gardening. He felt powerless, the sterile paperwork from a bureaucracy that didn't care about his birds suddenly a monumental weight. This wasn't just a neighborly spat anymore. This was a war. The letter was followed by a phone call from an inspector, a man named Carl with a weary, monotone voice. Marcus spent 2 hours on the phone detailing every permit, every veterinary record, every structural blueprint of the aviary. Carl sounded bored, like this was just another complaint from a busybody. "We'll need to schedule a visit, sir," he said, "just to verify everything is in order." The visit was a 3-hour ordeal. Carl, a man in a beige uniform, walked around the perimeter of the aviary, occasionally scribbling on a clipboard. He asked about the waste disposal, the food sources, the noise levels. Marcus, trying to be helpful, showed him a spreadsheet of his birds' diet, their daily health checks, the soundproofing he had installed. Carl just nodded, his face impassive. Marcus felt like he was defending his very right to exist. The entire time, he could feel Brenda's eyes on them from her back deck, a silent, watchful presence. Weeks turned into a month. The process dragged on. Legal fees began to pile up as he consulted with a lawyer who specialized in animal zoning laws. His evenings, once filled with the peaceful maintenance of his sanctuary, were now spent poring over local statutes and drafting email responses. The stress was a constant low-level hum in his mind. It gnawed at his sleep, soured his food, and replaced his joy with a simmering resentment. He saw Brenda regularly, either through his kitchen window or when she was walking her small terrier, a puffball of a dog with a perpetually worried expression. She would glance at his yard, a small, knowing smile on her face. She was winning, and she knew it. The quiet destruction of his passion was her ultimate form of justice. One particularly sweltering Tuesday, he was on a conference call for his day job, a soulless corporate position he endured to fund his real life. He was staring out the window, his mind drifting, when he saw Brenda's husband, Gary, come running out of their back door. Gary was a quiet, unassuming man, always deferential to his wife. He was holding his phone to his ear, his face ashen. He was not looking at Marcus's aviary. He was looking at the back of their own property, at the tall hedges that separated their yard from the undeveloped woodland at the edge of the neighborhood. Marcus leaned closer to the window, the conference call forgotten. Something was wrong. Gary was gesturing wildly, his voice a panicked squawk that even from a distance was tinged with fear. He heard a door slam, and Brenda came out, still in her gardening gloves, looking annoyed. She followed her husband's frantic gaze. For a moment, she was just standing there, a small, indignant figure in the middle of her pristine lawn. Then her body went rigid. Her hands flew to her mouth, the wicker basket of pruned roses falling from her grasp and spilling across the grass. She took a stumbling step backward and then another, her face twisting in a grotesque mask of shock and disbelief. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Marcus's anger was replaced by a cold, unsettling curiosity. He didn't feel triumph. He felt a primal gut-level dread. He dropped the phone, his call beeping in a forgotten corner of the room. He walked out his back door, his eyes locked on her yard. The low hedges at the back of her property were rustling unnaturally. They were not rustling in a gust of wind. They were moving from within, a slow, deliberate wave. A wave that seemed to rise and fall with an impossibly rhythmic motion. He saw a flash of dark scales, a pattern of emerald and obsidian so vibrant it seemed to drink the light. The shape emerged from the thick green foliage, a head the size of a microwave oven, its eye a cold, unblinking yellow. It was not a squirrel. It was not a bird. It was not a pest. And it was moving across her pristine lawn, toward her back deck, a silent, terrifying, impossibly long serpent. Brenda screamed. A raw, guttural sound of pure terror, a sound he had never heard from her before. It was a sound that had nothing to do with her meticulously cultivated reality. A sound ripped from the deepest, darkest part of the wild. He stood there, frozen, as the creature, a behemoth of muscle and scale, slithered into the light, its length unfolding like a nightmare unspooling in slow motion. It just kept coming, and coming, and coming. It was more than a snake. It was an act of God, It was a 50-foot-long monument to cosmic irony, and it was in Brenda's yard. Brenda's scream ripped through the placid suburban afternoon, a sound so utterly out of place it felt like a violation of the very air. It was a primal, terrified sound, and for a split second, Marcus felt a flicker of something close to pity before the full, horrifying reality of the situation took over. The colossal serpent, a living river of emerald and obsidian, continued its slow, deliberate journey across her immaculately kept lawn. It was a beast of impossible scale, its body so thick that the roses it crushed beneath its weight were reduced to a fine, green pulp. Its movements were fluid and silent, a hypnotic dance of pure predatory power. Neighbors, drawn by Brenda's scream and the unusual commotion, began to emerge from their homes. Phones were raised, their screens glowing like fireflies, but the frantic clicking of cameras was no match for the silent awe that had fallen over the community. Children, playing in their front yards just moments before, stood frozen, their mouths agape, pointing with trembling fingers. The suburban utopia of Meadowbrook Estates was cracking, and through the fissure, something ancient and monstrous had crawled in. Marcus, still standing on his back porch, a forgotten phone lying by his feet, felt a surreal mix of emotions. The karmic justice was a staggering blow, a cosmic slap in the face to Brenda and her petty complaints. He should have felt triumphant, vindicated, but looking at the sheer size of the creature, a chill colder than any winter wind snaked down his spine. This was no ordinary snake. This was an apex predator from a realm of nightmares. His birds, his beautiful, vulnerable birds, were just on the other side of a thin steel mesh. And while the fence might hold a human, it was nothing more than a momentary inconvenience for a creature of this size and power. His feud with Brenda, the HOA, the legal fees, all of it seemed to shrink into utter insignificance. The stakes had just been raised from a property dispute to a matter of life and death. Gary, a man who had always seemed to exist in his wife's shadow, was now shouting into his phone, his voice a panicked stammer. 50 feet! I swear to God, it's 50 feet. It's in our backyard. He was pacing in frantic, uneven circles, his eyes wide and unseeing. Brenda was still standing there, a statue of pure, frozen horror. The snake's head was now less than 10 feet from her back deck. It stopped, its head rising slowly, a thick, muscular column, until it was taller than Gary. It wasn't a hiss it made, but a low, guttural rumble, a sound that seemed to vibrate in the very air around them. The first siren cut through the twilight, followed quickly by another. A police cruiser screeched to a halt in front of Brenda's house, lights flashing. An officer, a young man with a freshly shaven face and a look of confused bewilderment, got out of his car, his hand hovering over his sidearm. He took one look at the scene, at the towering serpent and the petrified couple, and his mouth fell open. He spoke into his radio, his voice cracking. "We have a code 3, requesting immediate animal control assistance." And a tactical response unit. "We have a very large snake." "Repeat, a very large snake." Marcus saw another familiar vehicle pull up behind the police car. It was the white van with the Meadowbrook Animal Welfare and Control crest. Carl, the same bored, weary-voiced inspector from his case. Carl got out of the van, a clipboard in his hand, a look of professional ennui on his face. That look evaporated instantly. He stared at the snake, then at Brenda, then back at the snake, his clipboard falling from his hand and hitting the ground with a soft thud. The pages, filled with notes on Marcus's noisy birds, scattered in the light breeze. I don't, Carl stammered, his professional demeanor shattered. "What is that?" Brenda finally found her voice. It was a thin, reedy wail, the sound of a woman whose reality had just been obliterated. "He did this. He brought it here. It's one of his wild animals." She pointed a trembling finger at Marcus, her eyes filled with a desperate, hysterical accusation. Marcus's blood ran cold. The sheer audacity, the unbelievable self-preservation of the lie, was an electric shock. "Are you insane, Brenda?" He yelled across the fence, his voice now a low growl of pure indignation. "That thing is a python! A python!" The police officer, trying to make sense of the situation, turned his gaze to Marcus. "Sir, is that your animal?" "No, absolutely not." Marcus roared. "I have birds. It's an anaconda or a python, something that shouldn't exist in a place like this." The officer, clearly out of his depth, just shook his head. "Stay back, sir. Everyone stay back." More neighbors were gathering. A low murmur of fear and speculation rippled through the crowd. Phones were buzzing, texts flying. The news vans were not far behind. Marcus saw a cameraman with a shoulder-mounted camera sprinting down the street, followed by a reporter in a crisp suit, their faces alight with the unmistakable thrill of a major story. Brenda, seeing the camera crews, seemed to find a bizarre, new strength. She turned to the reporters, her tear-stained face a study in theatrical distress. "He's a menace!" she cried, pointing at Marcus again. "His animals. He was warned." She was spinning a narrative, twisting the events to fit her own desperate need for control. Gary, however, was in a full-blown panic. He had retreated to the back deck, cowering behind a small wicker table. "Brenda, honey, that's not his," he whispered, his voice shaking. But Brenda wasn't listening. She was a woman drowning, grabbing at any piece of flotsam to stay afloat, even if it was a lie that would sink her neighbor. The snake, as if sensing the emotional turbulence, began to move again. It slithered past her rose bushes, its enormous head now pointed directly at the border between her property and Marcus's. The sheer scale of it was breathtaking. It was a creature of myth, not a resident of suburban America. Its cold, yellow eyes, larger than a dinner plate, seemed to fix on Marcus. A silent, ancient gaze. A new kind of terror took hold of Marcus. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This wasn't about vindication. This was about survival. He had to get to his sanctuary. He had to protect his birds. Just as he was about to make a move, to abandon the scene and his nemesis for the safety of his flock, the snake did something truly impossible. Its massive head, still locked on him, slowly began to turn, not toward his house, but towards the back door of Brenda's colonial. A door that was standing slightly ajar, a small, dark opening in the wall of a house that was about to become a tomb. Brenda's horrified shriek was cut short as the snake's head, with a swift, terrifying motion, began to enter her home. The entire neighborhood watched, their collective breath held, as the front portion of the beast's body disappeared into the doorway, a silent, implacable invasion. It wasn't a punishment for Brenda's report. It was a delivery, a slow, methodical, and monstrous act of payback. And as Marcus stared at the disappearing tail of the serpent, he knew with absolute certainty that this wasn't just a simple case of karma. It was something far more deliberate, far more personal. And it had nothing to do with Brenda's petty complaints. It was for him. The snake had come for him, and it was using her as its own personal front door. The back door of Brenda's house swallowed the serpent's head and neck with a sickening shudder of splintering wood and groaning hinges. The doorframe, a bastion of suburban security just moments ago, cracked and warped under the immense pressure. Brenda's scream was cut short, not by silence, but by a gurgling, strangled sound of pure, unadulterated panic. She scrambled back on her deck, stumbling over a perfectly placed deck chair, her manicured fingers clawing at the glass of the sliding patio door. Gary, her perpetually docile husband, finally snapped. He grabbed her by the arms and dragged her inside, slamming the glass door shut just as the snake's massive body slid past. A monstrous, rippling torrent of muscle and scales. From his own yard, Marcus watched, a cold, breathless horror seizing him. The spectacle of the invading creature was too surreal to process. It was like watching a cartoon villain's lair being constructed in real time. The snake wasn't just entering the house. It was filling it. The body, thick as a telephone pole, contorted and folded as it moved, its scales catching the glint of the setting sun. He heard the muffled crashes from within the house, the sound of furniture being pulverized, glass shattering. It wasn't a stealthy predator. It was an unstoppable force of nature, a living wrecking ball. The police officer, the young, overwhelmed rookie, fumbled for his radio, his face a ghostly white. It's inside the house. The suspect. It's inside. Carl, the animal control officer, finally found his voice, a high-pitched squeak of disbelief. That is not a python. That's a titanoboa. "That's an impossible species! That's extinct." His words, thin and desperate, cut through the growing chaos and fear. They were met with a low, disbelieving murmur from the gathered crowd. A reporter, her microphone held aloft, was shouting into a camera, her excitement barely concealing a tremor of fear. Unconfirmed reports from animal control suggest the creature is an extinct species of giant serpent. We are awaiting a tactical response unit, as well as a specialized team from the National Wildlife and Park Service. Marcus, however, heard none of it. Carl's words, "extinct species," echoed in his mind, cutting through the noise and the panic. He was no reptile expert. His passion lay in avian life, but he knew enough about zoology to know that what Carl was saying was madness. It was impossible unless... He thought back to the rumors that had circulated in the online forums for high-end exotic animal enthusiasts. Whispers of a new kind of genetic splicing, a kind of selective breeding so advanced it bordered on the forbidden. Tales of black market deals for creatures that should not exist. He had dismissed them as urban legends, the wild imaginings of enthusiasts with more money than sense. But looking at the living nightmare that was now occupying Brenda's house, he knew. This was not a random act of nature. This was an act of man. He felt a new kind of cold seep into his bones, one that was far worse than the fear for his birds. The snake had entered Brenda's house as its own front door, a grotesque mockery of a welcome. He had to assume its ultimate destination was his sanctuary, his aviary, the one place filled with the kind of creatures a snake of this size would find a delicacy. It had used Brenda's complaint as its own personal invitation. The thought made his stomach churn. A new wave of sound erupted from Brenda's house, a sickening crunch, followed by the sound of splintering glass. He saw a shadow move across the front window, a slow-moving darkness that seemed to blot out the light. The creature was navigating the interior of the house, heading towards the front. He imagined the snake, its massive body coiling and uncoiling in her pristine living room, a monstrous guest trampling her perfectly Persian rugs. He had to do something. He couldn't just stand there and wait for it to finish its slow, destructive journey. He had to act. He had to warn everyone. But who would believe him? He was the one Brenda had just accused of owning it. The very people who could help were looking at him as a potential suspect. He made a decision. He turned and ran. Not away, but back toward his own house. The cameras were on him, the police were watching, but he didn't care. He had to get to his sanctuary. He had to be a step ahead of whatever was coming. He could hear Brenda's frantic wails, the hysterical sobs of a woman who had finally gotten what she asked for. A taste of the wild, delivered straight to her door. He fumbled with the keys, his hands shaking, and unlocked the reinforced door of his sanctuary. The chittering and cooing of his birds filled the air, a beautiful, frantic sound that was a stark contrast to the destruction next door. The emerald doves flapped their wings, the parrots squawked, their bright, curious eyes fixed on him. They were completely oblivious to the danger just a few yards away. He didn't have time to evacuate them all. He didn't have time to call for help. He had to be strategic. His heart pounded against his ribs, a frantic, rhythmic drum. He ran to the far wall and unlatched a small, reinforced metal case. Inside was a single, sleek black tablet not much bigger than his hand. This was not for his birds. This was a failsafe, a last resort, a piece of technology he had acquired years ago from a shady contact in the exotic animal trade. He had never thought he would have to use it. He heard another crash from next door, a sickening, grinding sound that could only be one thing. The snake had reached the front of the house and was likely trying to find a way out. He had to hurry. He pulled out the tablet, his mind racing. He knew the password. He knew the protocol. He just didn't know if the stories were true. He hit the single button on the screen. It came to life, a low hum filling the air. He felt a vibration in the ground, and a small, almost imperceptible tremor ran through his aviary. A soft green light pulsed from the tablet. He looked over at Brenda's house and his eyes widened. The snake had stopped moving. Its enormous head was pressed against the glass of the front window, its cold yellow eyes staring directly at him. It wasn't just a stare. It was a look of recognition, a look that said, "I know you." Then something even more impossible happened. The massive beast, A creature of pure brute force, slowly, meticulously, began to retreat. It was backing out of the house. It wasn't trying to find another way through. It was leaving. It was obeying. The destruction inside continued, a symphony of broken furniture and splintered wood. As the snake's colossal body slowly uncoiled from the confines of Brenda's living room, Marcus's finger was still on the screen of the tablet. The green light was still pulsing. The snake was a puppet on a string, and he had just found the controls. His horror turned to a new, terrifying realization. The snake had not come for him. It had come from him. This wasn't revenge. This was a retrieval. He hadn't been a target. He had been a carrier. And somewhere in the chaos, buried beneath the splintered wood and crushed roses of Brenda's yard, a man who called himself a wildlife expert was on the phone. His face pale, his voice a panicked whisper. "The package has been delivered," he said. "The client is demanding immediate extraction. They've found the carrier." The impossible creature, a titan of scale and muscle, slowly uncoiled from the confines of Brenda's house. Its retreat was as unnerving as its invasion. The crowd, the police, the gawking reporters, all were paralyzed, watching the monstrous anaconda obediently slide back through the shattered doorway. Marcus's finger remained pressed against the sleek black tablet, the device a hot, humming secret in his hand. The green light pulsed, a metronome for the beast's impossible obedience. He felt a sickening surge of power mixed with a profound, bone-deep terror. This wasn't a punishment for Brenda's report. It was a delivery, a slow, methodical, and monstrous act of payback. And as Marcus stared at the disappearing tail of the serpent, he knew with absolute certainty that this wasn't just a simple case of karma. It was something far more deliberate, far more personal. And it had nothing to do with Brenda's petty complaints. It was for him. The snake had come for him, and it was using her as its own personal front door. A man on the phone, his face pale, his voice a panicked whisper. "The package has been delivered," he said. "The client is demanding immediate extraction. They've found the carrier." The words echoed in Marcus's mind, a chilling pronouncement that recontextualized his entire existence. He wasn't a witness to a bizarre suburban tragedy. He was an unwitting pawn. The tablet was not a remote control he had purchased. It was a fail-safe, a homing beacon, a device meant to retrieve the package he had unknowingly harbored. The snake wasn't a creature that had simply appeared. It had been sent, and he was the carrier, his birds, his sanctuary. He had always dismissed the whispers in the exotic animal forums, the dark tales of forbidden genetics and black market deals for impossible creatures. He had bought his doves and parrots from a reputable dealer, or so he thought. He had acquired a few rare species from a contact who dealt in ethical, international transfers. Had he been a mule? A living, breathing shipping container for a creature of unimaginable power? The thought made him sick. He looked over at Brenda's house. The snake's tail finally disappeared, the thud of its body hitting the ground outside, sending a low tremor through the earth. He heard a door slam and a muffled, hysterical sobbing from within. Her life was in ruins, but she was alive. And so was Gary. Marcus had saved them, a bizarre, unintended consequence of trying to protect his birds. The police officer, no longer fixated on the giant snake, was now looking at Marcus with a new, deeply suspicious gaze. "Sir," the officer called out, his hand on his weapon, "I'm going to need you to put your hands where I can see them." Slowly, Brenda, ever the opportunist, flung open her back door, her face a streaked mess of tears and mascara. "He did it!" she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger. "He has some kind of remote. He's a monster!" A new voice, calm and silky, cut through the din. "It's an unfortunate misunderstanding." A man emerged from the crowd, a figure so unassuming he had been completely invisible until that moment. He was tall and slender, dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, his silver hair a pristine cap. He moved with an almost preternatural grace, as if he existed on a different plane of reality. His face was a study in bland professionalism, but his eyes, a startling shade of pale blue, were as cold as a frozen lake. He wasn't a neighbor, and he wasn't an official. He was a predator. "I am a consultant," the man said, his voice a smooth, low hum. "My name is Silas. I am here to assist with the relocation of the animal." He spoke with an authority that silenced the crowd, even the police officer. He walked directly toward Marcus, his gaze never leaving his face. Marcus gripped the tablet, the plastic suddenly feeling too hot and too small in his hand. "That's not just an animal." Carl, the animal control officer, blurted out, a desperate plea for recognition. "That's an extinct species. It's a titanoboa." Silas turned his head slightly, a small, dismissive smile playing on his lips. "Mr. Peterson," he said, and Marcus was shocked he knew his name. "While I appreciate your enthusiasm, the scientific community is prone to exaggeration. This is simply a genetically modified reticulated python, a very rare variant. Nothing to be concerned about. Now, if you'll excuse us, I have a very important conversation to have with Mr. Marcus." He said Marcus's name like a verdict. The crowd, mesmerized by his calm assurance, began to back away, a quiet tide of relief washing over them. The police officer, still confused but seeing an authority figure, lowered his weapon. The reporters, sensing a new angle, began to swarm Silas with questions. He ignored them all, his entire focus on Marcus. "The delivery was a success," Silas said, stepping over the crumpled rose petals on Brenda's lawn and stopping just inches from Marcus's fence. He spoke in a low voice, a private conversation in the middle of a media circus. "The package has been secured. Now, we need to discuss your compensation." "Compensation?" Marcus whispered, his mind reeling. "What are you talking about? I didn't know anything about this." Silas chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "That's our standard operating procedure, Marcus. Our carriers are never informed. It eliminates risk. A small, undetectable genetic marker in your bird's food supply. A biosymbiotic link. For a decade, your aviary has been a quiet, unassuming home for a very rare, very valuable asset." He glanced at the sanctuary, his pale eyes flicking over the reinforced glass. "A nursery, you might say." The word nursery felt like a physical blow. The snake wasn't the package. It was a child, a baby. A 10-year-old baby. "You're insane," Marcus said, his voice trembling. "What did you put in my birds?" Silas's smile widened, a flash of teeth that didn't reach his cold eyes. "A very sophisticated, very delicate genetic marker. A tracker. It allowed us to monitor the package's growth and location. The package, it seems, has become self-aware. It found a way to reach you. It saw your birds as kin, as a family of feathered kin, and wanted to be close to you. Unfortunately, it chose the most dramatic route." He glanced at the wreckage of Brenda's house. "Hence the need for immediate extraction." "Extraction?" Marcus echoed, the word feeling like a death sentence. "Yes, we need to collect the package. And you, Marcus, have become a liability. You've discovered the means of control. You know too much." Silas's gaze dropped to Marcus's hand. "Give me the tablet now. This can still be resolved peacefully. We can make sure you never have to worry about a thing again." Marcus looked from Silas's cold, predatory eyes to the tablet in his hand. The green light pulsed, a single, hopeful, terrifying beat. The snake had listened to him. He had control. He was no longer a victim. He was a player. He knew what he had to do. With a defiant look, he hit a new button on the tablet, one he had only seen in the instructions, a button marked Protocol V. The green light flashed bright, then went dark. A low, electronic whirring sound came from within the sanctuary, and a hidden door Marcus had never noticed before slid open, revealing an empty, cavernous space. "What have you done?" Silas asked, his voice losing its calm composure for the first time. Marcus didn't answer. He just looked past the man, at the panicked face of the police officer, at the terrified eyes of Brenda, and at the gaping empty space in his aviary. He had just activated the failsafe, but it wasn't for the snake. It was for them. And as the ground began to tremble, a sound like 100 jet engines revving up filled the air. A sound that was coming not from his property, but from deep within the earth itself. The ground bucked and groaned, not like a tremor, but like something was pushing through the earth from below. The sound wasn't jet engines. It was the rhythmic, deafening grind of a colossal machine moving tons of soil and rock. Dust and pulverized asphalt shot into the air in a thick, choking plume from the middle of the street, instantly obscuring the panicked crowd. The perfectly manicured lawn, the symbol of Meadowbrook Estate's rigid conformity, tore apart as a massive armored cylinder. Half the length of the street began to rise from the chasm. Silas's mask of detached professionalism crumbled completely. His pale eyes widened in a look of pure, unadulterated shock. That's impossible, he stammered, his smooth voice replaced by a frantic, disbelieving whisper. That's not ours. That's their design. He looked at Marcus not with contempt, but with a new, terrified respect. What did you hit? What did you send out? Marcus didn't answer. He couldn't. He was just as stunned. The hidden door in his aviary, the one he had never known about, was a massive steel airlock. The sound was not a fail-safe for the snake. It was an arrival. The cylinder finished its ascent with a final hydraulic hiss, its matte black surface reflecting the flashing red and blue lights of the police cruiser. It looked less like a vehicle and more like a weaponized submarine, a leviathan of steel and circuitry. Its top hatch, a circular disc, opened with an audible click, revealing a sleek, well-lit interior. From within, figures emerged, clad not in suits but in tactical gear, their faces obscured by polarized visors. They were armed not with tranquilizer guns, but with high-tech assault rifles. They moved with a synchronized, efficient precision that made Silas's cool demeanor look like an amateur's performance. The lead agent, a woman whose face was a study in cool indifference, raised a hand to her earpiece. Target acquired. Package confirmed. Subject is live and contained. She said it as if she were reading a grocery list. Then her gaze fell on Silas, and a ghost of a smirk touched her lips.
Well.
Look what the cat dragged in. The corporation is getting sloppy. Silas, seeing his life's work and his freedom about to disappear, made a break for it, turning and sprinting into the chaos of the street. He didn't get far. A non-lethal round, fired with a soft whoomph from one of the agent's rifles, hit him in the leg. He collapsed, clutching his thigh, his tailored suit now stained with dirt and blood. The lead agent's gaze then moved to Marcus. She walked toward him, her footsteps silent, her weapon still aimed at the ground. She stopped at the fence, her head tilted slightly as if she were observing a particularly rare specimen. "Marcus Thorne," she said, her voice a low, clear tone. "You are a protected subject of the Federal Wildlife and Preservation Authority. You have been unknowingly operating as a Class A carrier for an unsanctioned genetic asset. For your cooperation, you are now under our jurisdiction." Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. "Unknowingly? What are you talking about?" "The genetic marker you were exposed to was a prototype for a new kind of biotelemetry. Your aviary, with its diverse RNA signatures, provided the perfect low-level electromagnetic field to incubate the asset." She paused, as if gauging his comprehension. The asset, the snake, was a living data drive. A highly classified black market information package. It wasn't meant to grow to that size, but your unique aviary's, shall we say, nurturing atmosphere accelerated its growth beyond all projections. He looked from her to the immense, dormant snake on Brenda's lawn, which was now being carefully, meticulously secured with advanced glowing restraints by other agents. It was a bizarre, surreal scene, a mythical monster being carted away like oversized luggage. Brenda, completely ignored by the tactical team, finally found her voice, a broken, tear-filled screech. "What about me? What about my house? He's the one! He has the remote!" The agent didn't even look at her. "All damages will be covered by the authority. We will be in touch with your insurance company." She turned back to Marcus, her eyes softening ever so slightly. "You are not a criminal, Mr. Thorne. You are a victim. And now you are a valuable asset to us. We will provide you and your birds with a new home, new identities. You will be safe." She held out a gloved hand. Marcus looked at it, then at the tablet in his hand. The tablet felt useless now, a child's toy. He dropped it, the device hitting the ground with a soft thud. It didn't matter anymore. His life, as he knew it, was gone. He looked over at Brenda, who was staring at him, her face a mixture of impotent rage and utter defeat. He had tried to protect his birds, and in doing so, he had become the very thing she had accused him of being, a keeper of wild animals, but not the kind she could have ever imagined. The petty small-town feud, the HOA, the fines, all of it had become a cosmic joke. As the agents led him toward the open hatch of the armored vehicle, Marcus took one last look at his home. The street was a battlefield, a silent testament to a war he never knew he was fighting. He didn't feel triumph or vindication or even fear. He felt a profound sense of loss. He was leaving the only life he had ever known, all because of a neighbor who couldn't stand a little bird song. He realized then that Brenda wasn't his nemesis. She was just the delivery girl for his own destruction. And as the hatch to the vehicle began to close, Marcus felt a chill run down his spine, a sense of deep and terrible irony. He was now a bird in a cage of his own making, his feathers clipped by a company that had made a monster out of